The second generation version of Toyota's Mirai is a model the brand wants you to choose on its own merits, not just because it's a hydrogen fuel cell car. Its predecessor was first to market with this technology, and this replacement design aims to play a key role in popularising it amongst forward-thinking ordinary customers. Ultimately, this contender needs a far more developed hydrogen station infrastructure for popular acceptance, but it's a fascinating glimpse into all our motoring futures.
Are you ready for a hydrogen fuel cell car yet? Probably not, but Toyota wants you to be, the brand promoting hydrogen as the fuel of the future. Unfortunately, most of the rest of the industry feels there's little potential for sales growth with this technology over the next couple of decades. But as the world's biggest automaker, you can afford to think a little differently and produce cars like this one, the rejuvenated second-generation version of the Toyota Mirai. You might need a bit of background in the whole concept of FCEV models like this one, fuel cell electric vehicles. These use hydrogen to operate, are very efficient, can travel long distances, have fast refuelling times, and emit only water. For Toyota, an FCEV like this one is the ultimate eco car. The company isn't the first to recognise the potential of this type of technology either, not by a long shot. The first hydrogen-fuelled internal combustion engine was designed by Francois-Isaac de Rivaz back in 1807. And a century and a half later, scientist Roger Billings converted the engine of a Ford Model A to run on hydrogen. As a result, various brands dabbled with hydrogen-fueled prototypes in the 80s and 90s, but only Toyota set to work to actually develop one for production. The first generation Mirai, which is Japanese for future, launched in 2014. Back then, the future for FCEVs was looking quite bright. Honda joined the hydrogen model market in 2017 with a second-generation Clarity FCV design that wasn't sold here. But 2 years later, we did get the Hyundai Nexo, that fuel cell-powered SUV, still Toyota's only rival in this market. The segment hasn't grown because the public infrastructure for refuelling hasn't expanded. At the time of this test, there were still only 13 hydrogen refuelling stations in the whole of the UK. And because that hasn't happened, manufacturer interest in the FCEV concept has waned. Mercedes, the latest big name to drop its hydrogen fuel cell development programme. But Toyota remains undaunted, despite the fact that only around 17,000 first-generation Mirai models were sold globally in 7 years, most at a loss on fleet leases. A big step forward was going to be needed to rejuvenate this sector, and a big step forward is what we've got here. In place of the ugly old Prius-based Mark I Mirai, what Toyota has now served up is a second-generation model that's much cheaper and much larger too, based this time on the underpinnings of a Lexus LS limo. It's now priced directly against that mid-sized Tesla or premium brand EV you were thinking about, and its eco-credentials are the next stage on from those of any conventional electric vehicle. If you've a hydrogen filling station within easy distance, you might even be tempted by one of these. Should you be? Well, you'll need the industry's most comprehensive road test review, the Car and Driving Road Test, to find out. So what on earth might driving a car powered purely by hydrogen be like? Well, get comfortable behind the wheel, press this big start button, and a green ready light illuminates on the instrument screen as you release the electric handbrake. But then, just to remind you that this isn't one of Toyota's hybrids, a Mirai graphic appears before, slightly alarmingly, a graphic wave of water whooshes across the screen in front and on into the infotainment display to the left of it. Such is your introduction to new era mobility. But how might the car delivering it to you feel to drive? Well, the answer is that this Mirai feels very EV-like, which is what you would expect, since when it comes right down to it, this model is powered by electricity. It's merely delivered to the wheels in a different way. If you want the technicalities, you'll get them in our cost of ownership section. In the main, the power to drive this car comes from its FCEV fuel cell. Think of it like a little onboard power station surrounded by hydrogen tanks feeding in gas. The fuel cell creates an electrochemical reaction to convert the hydrogen to water, the byproduct of which is electricity that powers an electric motor on the rear axle. The energy for that comes from an adjacent little 1.24 kilowatt-hour battery borrowed from the Lexus LS 500h hybrid, which powers the car under low loads or harsh acceleration, but mainly motive energy comes from the fuel cell. With the first generation Mirai, Toyota was so focused on making this innovative FCEV technology actually work that thoughts of drive dynamics were somewhat secondary. This Mark II model is different. Chief engineer Yoshikazu Tanaka wants the Mirai now to have the kind of dynamic and responsive performance that can bring a smile to the driver's face. The starting point in achieving that goal was the installation of a much stiffer and more sophisticated platform. In place of underpinnings that on the previous model were derived from those of a Mark III Prius, this second generation Mirai shares its sophisticated GAL chassis with a rather larger and more exalted saloon, the Lexus LS. It's quite a step up, which has also necessitated a switch away from the front-driven format of the Mark I model to a rear-driven drivetrain. More power was also needed. The previous car's 152 bhp electric motor output increased here to 180 bhp, a level now deemed more appropriate for this Mirai's upmarket aspirations. And of course, Toyota knew that future buyers would want this car to go further between hydrogen cell refills, hence a 30% range increase. This model is now claimed to travel 402 miles between top-ups. Predictably, the chassis changes aren't anything like enough to create properly rewarding handling. The car's really too heavy for that, though as we'll see later, that hasn't stopped the brand from trying to improve the car dynamically. Mainly though, the updates have instead been targeted at creating the kind of elegant luxury feel that's been benchmarked by Tanaka-san and his team against conventional luxury models from BMW and Mercedes. The engineers worked on creating light and easy handling on winding roads and a linear, smooth response when pulling away. And generally, that's what you get. Not that you'll be pulling away very fast. A 180 bhp output in a big luxury saloon weighing nearly 2 tons really isn't quite enough. It leaves this Mirai with a power-to-weight ratio of a humble 1.6-litre family hatchback, just 94 bhp per tonne, and the performance figures reflect that. Rest to 62 miles an hour in 9 seconds, en route to 108 miles an hour. You'll need to select the most focused of the 3 provided drive modes, Sport, to achieve these stats, but we don't expect many Mirai owners to be doing that very often. First, because you don't lose much in terms of forward thrust when staying with the 2 other more conventional settings, Normal and Eco. And second, because sticking with these enables you to better enjoy one of this car's 2 great dynamic attributes, its beautifully supple quality of ride. It really is most impressive, courtesy of a completely redesigned multi-link front and rear suspension setup. This allows the car to glide over porous surfaces with impressive decorum, a different world from, say, a comparably priced Tesla. The other thing that makes driving this car feel truly effortless is the near silence that accompanies almost everything it does. This might seem an obvious point to make about a car that is effectively merely a different breed of EV, but with so many electric vehicles, all the absence of an engine does is emphasise wind noise and tyre roar. There's little of that here. The experience really is quite Lexus-like. Well, it is if you choose not to use the rather pointless active sound control system anyway, which introduces fake engine noise through the audio speakers. Turn that off and there's just the distant sound of the electric motor whirring up and down like a vacuum cleaner as you exercise your right foot. Exercising your right foot isn't something you're going to want to do very much in a country where, at the time of this test in spring 2022, there were just 13 stations available throughout the UK to refuel this car once it runs out of hydrogen. As mentioned earlier, Toyota has at least done what it can do by improving the driving range this time round, possibly because a third hydrogen storage tank has been added beneath the car, following the introduction of a smaller fuel cell stack created with the help of development partner BMW. That meant the fuel cell could be moved forward from its previous position beneath the front seats to a place beneath the bonnet, leaving the space beneath the passenger compartment almost entirely for hydrogen storage. The 3 tanks arranged in a T formation, 2 outer containers flanking a central one. The other benefit of this fundamental change was that it allowed the engineers to achieve an ideal 50-50 weight balance for sharper handling, further aided by the more rigid body, a 42% weight reduction, a lower centre of gravity and thicker anti-roll bars. Toyota has also added an active cornering assist torque vectoring system that applies brake force to the inside rear wheel when cornering at speed, increasing traction and stability through the turns. The heaviness of the bulky drivetrain is immediately evident before you've gone a mile or two down the road, so you're never encouraged to put any of this apparently improved dynamic prowess to the test. But should you be minded to try, you might find this oriental limo-sized eco-saloon a lot less boat-like than expected. Yes, of course, a conventional rear-driven large sedan would be a more confidence-inspiring thing to push along at speed on a twisting secondary road, but that's partly because of this Mirai's intentionally soft setup with its so-called pitch and bounce control system. When called upon, this Toyota can actually demonstrate surprising reserves of cornering grip and stability, but the whole experience seems unnatural and rather pointless in a car whose priorities clearly lie elsewhere. And anyway, the rather remote level of steering feel means that accurate corner placement at high speed requires a degree of guesswork. More relevant to the drive experience is the more powerful braking system. This includes a selectable brake driving mode, which, allied to this car's single-speed automatic, is supposed to replicate the effect of engine braking using manual transmission. It certainly increases off-throttle regenerative braking, which is useful for downhill gradients, but never to the kind of degree you get with the strongest regenerative settings available in some EVs. What's very different to an EV is the experience you get when you stop. Because water is the main byproduct of the fuel cell's energy production process, an aqueous vapour cloud briefly covers the back of the car, occasionally accompanied by a small puddle beneath it. If you don't want the potential slight embarrassment of this, an H2O button on the dash allows you to discharge the system's excess water before you stop. All very novel, but could you really choose this car over an EV? Well, only if you established a hydrogen filling station corridor of refuelling points along your most commonly covered routes, which would be difficult to do with the UK infrastructure the way it currently is, particularly if you happen to live north of the Midlands. Life as an early adopter has its challenges. If, though, you can somehow make this car work for you, then quite a special experience awaits in a car that's a sad signpost of the route many think the industry should have travelled. It's not likely that you'll be coming to this second-generation Mirai after experience with its predecessor, because hardly any examples of that older model were sold in the UK. But if you were, you'd be astonished at the transformation that's taken place here. The previous Mark III Prius-derived ugly duckling transformed into a graceful swan that shares its GAL platform with a Lexus LS limo. Chief engineer Yoshikazu Tanaka says he'd like customers to choose a Mirai merely because they want one, not because it happens to be hydrogen-powered. And that could happen. In profile, you immediately notice just how this car has jumped up several classes. 85mm longer than before, sizing it somewhere between a Mercedes E-Class and an S-Class. So, though the EV price comparison pictures it against a Tesla Model 3, the size stat is more Model S, from the outside anyway. It's gracefully shaped too, around a design theme Toyota calls silent dynamism, with sculpted shapes, so-called aero proportions, and sculpting that emphasises a sense of motion. The doors have a cylinder-shaped cross-section that narrows towards the front, and for those uninitiated in Mirai spotting, there's a rather unnecessary fuel cell badge behind the front wheel arch. And this Mark II model has gained much larger wheels, either 19 or, as in this case, 20 inches in size. Top spec trim gets this bitone paint finish with a black roof. At the front, this car is far better looking than most EVs. The low-set look aided by the central positioning of the blue-tinged Toyota emblem below the headlamp line, just above this imposing trapezoidal lower grille, which is underlined by a bright moulding along its bottom edge. The lighting's arranged in a two-tier design, with, on the upper level, the largest headlamp units ever fitted to a Toyota, these featuring this distinctive, bright, plated surround. Daytime running lights are arranged in this L shape and extend into the front wings, and on the lower tier, long, slim indicator lights emphasise the car's width. And at the back, well, there's a very rakishly angled screen and an integrated boot spoiler that creates a clear definition between the upper and lower sections of this rear end. The sense of the car sitting low to the ground is emphasised by this dark trapezoidal lower bumper section, the arched angles of which are echoed in the lines extending from the lower rear corners to these horizontal light clusters, which emphasise this Mark II model's 70mm width increase. These light units extend from the left and right across the car, meeting at the central Toyota badge, and their slim shape is accentuated by a dark finish for the lower turn indicator and the reversing lights. Toyota wants you to notice the little details too, like the fact that the middle of the R in the Mirai badge has a sharp rather than a rounded angle. We think it's rather more pertinent to notice that this fuelled car doesn't have an exhaust outlet, not even one for the deionised water that leaks out of an underfloor outlet pipe when you come to a stop, the excess byproduct from the fuel cell's energy production. You might disagree, but one of the things we find most refreshing about this Toyota's design is that it isn't an SUV, which would have been the easiest way to hide the bulky fuel cell powertrain. The smart exterior styling disguises that outside, but the packaging challenge will be much more difficult within. So let's take a look inside. Well, so far so good. The central hydrogen tank beneath the car necessitates this wide, high centre console between the seats, but it's been smartly designed and creates a pleasingly enveloping, almost cockpit-like feel. Your eye's immediately taken by this wide, shiny black control panel that starts on the left with the infotainment display, then stretches across the top of the dash. Recessing into the instrument cluster screen, you view through the three-spoke wheel. Almost everything else seems to sit the other side of this strangely curving silver strip, which starts by your left knee, then flows up past the stubby little black gear stick and over towards the passenger side along the top of the slim, horizontally arranged vents. Clearly, some thought has gone into creating the kind of ambience required of a £50,000 to £60,000 luxury saloon, which certainly wasn't the case with the previous generation model. Soft touch surfaces are almost everywhere you look, and shiny piano black trim coats the centre console, and the door cards feature double stitching and slim colour customisable ambient lighting strips. But like the plushly upholstered seats that never quite convince you that they're real leather, this cabin design never quite convinces you that it's anything other than high-end Toyota, when for the money you'd hope it might be Lexus-like. Signs of cost cutting lie with things like the cheap-feeling hard plastics at the centre of the steering wheel, and some of the design ergonomics aren't ideal. Things like the layered rows of little switches by your right knee, the slightly confusing profusion of buttons on the steering wheel, and the over-prominent placement of the cup holders and the phone charging mat between the seats. Plus, the shiny black finishing on this lower console quickly collects hairs and smears. Let's get onto those screens, starting with this 8-inch digital instrument cluster. It's not the clearest display you'll come across, with lots of scattered letters and numerals, but you'll quickly get to grips with it. The top section of the screen has a central speed readout, flanked on the left by drive assist and traffic sign features, and on the right by the time and your chosen drive mode. On the far left of the main part of the screen is a gear readout, and on the far right is your fuel level. The middle part is customisable via this steering wheel button through Eco, Drive Assist, Audio, Car and Settings sections. And with this top design premium pack model, this screen is supplemented by a 10.1-inch colour head-up display. Anything else you might need to know is covered off by this 12.3-inch multimedia central monitor. At first glance, you think that this is merely a conventional split-screen layout, but it's a bit cleverer than that. You can flick this side panel across to the far left of the screen, or flick it back to the right again, the idea being to better suit whichever front seat passenger wants to have priority in viewing it, a bit like the display on a Honda E. And what appears in this side panel is selectable. Choose from climate settings, seat heating, audio preferences, an energy monitor, and ambient lighting themes. There's a choice of 7 colours. The monitor's middle part is more conventional Toyota, which unfortunately means you get the usual low-resolution graphics and rather ineffective voice recognition system. Still, everything you really need is here via destination, audio, phone, apps and setup menus, including a 14-speaker JBL premium sound system, in-car Wi-Fi and a Miracast smart device link section that connects your handset into Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring. Avoid bass trim, and you also get a panoramic view monitor with a view button that takes you on a 360-degree perambulation around the vehicle, which finishes with the least realistic overhead view car depiction we've ever seen. Enough with screens. What else might you need to know? Well, you get proper physical buttons for the climate system rather than fiddly touchpad controllers, and the powered heated seats are very comfortable with electric lumbar adjustment and a choice of either fabric, soft tech synthetic leather, or as in this case, real semi-aniline leather depending on trim. Neat touches include these touch-sensitive overhead lights and the way that the H2O discharge system we mentioned earlier can be linked to the car's navigation system to prevent water being released in inappropriate places like car parks. On this top model, there are 2 further nice additions: a digital rear view mirror that can present real-time images from the car's rear camera, and a teammate advanced park system that not only parks the car for you as long as you're in it, but can also store frequently used parking spaces in its memory, such as those at home or at work. All-round visibility isn't perfect. Your forward view is impeded by the high dashboard that obscures the bonnet line from view, and there are issues to the side and over your shoulder thanks to side windows that aren't particularly deep, thick rear pillars and a rather small, shallow back window. Just as well then that you get large door mirrors, all-round sensors and a rather low-res reversing camera as standard fit across the range. Earlier, we mentioned this wireless charging mat on the lower centre console. Well, we should point out that rather meanly, it's fitted only at the top of the range, and when you use it, sunlight on a bright day will reflect directly off your phone screen into your eyes. What about cabin storage? Well, there's this big lidded box between the seats, which has a 2.1 amp port, a USB-A socket and a 12-volt point, but because of that enormous hydrogen tank beneath, the space provided here is rather shallow. Now, earlier we mentioned the twin cup holders and this wireless charging mat on the low centre console, the latter rather meanly fitted only at the top of the range. Toyota has forgotten an overhead sunglasses compartment and the door pockets are small, lacking bottle holders, but the glove box is big and you get ticket clip slots in the sun visors, plus another by your right knee. Let's take a look in the rear, which unfortunately is where things start to unravel a bit, as the packaging limitations around the powertrain start to really tell. The useful 140mm wheelbase length increase of this second generation model to 2,920mm doesn't, unfortunately, translate into standards of legroom that are anything like class competitive for an executive sector saloon. Instead, it's more like the sort of thing you'd get in a far smaller BMW 3 Series sized model. You can just about get your feet under the seat ahead, but your knees will be bent at a bit of an unnatural angle, which won't be ideal on longer trips. Headroom's also pretty poor by executive segment standards. Anyone approaching 6 foot will certainly struggle, not helped by this ceiling ridge just in front of your head. And this enormous tunnel for the central hydrogen tank means that you certainly wouldn't want to be seated in the middle here. It might also feel a bit dark and dismal back here were it not for these little rear quarter-light windows, though that's not an issue with this top-spec model courtesy of its huge dual-pane Skyview panoramic glass roof. On all Mirais there are central vents and twin USB-A ports, plus individual overhead lights and ISOFIX tethers on the rear parcel shelf. Storage is at a bit of a premium because there are no door pockets, but you get seat back pockets and a deep stowage compartment in this central armrest, the end of which has pop-out cup holders. Let's finish with a look at the boot, which you might expect it to be fitted with a powered opener at this price. However, it's not. The button is a little difficult to find at first, but can alternatively open by the key fob or from inside the car. After the disappointment of rear seat accommodation, we weren't expecting too much from trunk capacity, and rightly so, as it turns out, because there's just 321 litres of it. Yes, 10 litres more than you get in a Ford Fiesta. To exacerbate the problem, the boot opening is small and the wheel arch intrusion's quite prominent, which would make getting in something like a large pushchair somewhat problematic. Plus, because of the FCEV powertrain, there's virtually no space beneath the floor, mainly because of the positioning of the third hydrogen tank, and no possibility of having fold-forward rear seat backs either. Still, the designers have done what they can. It's rather neat in the way that you can hook the top of the load floor cover on top of the boot opening, and there are recessed areas on both sides so that you could, say, get a set of golf clubs in width-wise. The area on the right has a compartment for the battery. With this Mark II Mirai, Toyota has slashed the price by 24%, seeking to gain more traction in the hydrogen fuel cell segment. And from launch and at the time of this test in spring 2022, the asking figures began at around £50,000, which gets you the base design version. The mid-range design plus pack variant costs around £54,000, and the top design premium pack model we're trying here costs around £65,000. As is the current trend, Mirai customers won't typically be forking out the total sum prior to a drive away from the showroom. Not usually, anyway. Virtually all sales will be done on finance deals, either to a handful of enlightened private early adopters or to eco-minded corporations wanting to make a green statement. From launch and at the time of this test, Toyota was asking £435, excluding VAT, a month on BCH or business contract hire finance for the base design model, £450 per month excluding VAT on BCH for the mid-range design plus pack variant, and £609 excluding VAT per month on BCH for this top design premium pack model. However you choose to fund your Mirai, there's still a lot of money for a saloon with this kind of cabin and boot space. But even at this level, the brand is unlikely to be even close to covering the cost of the fuel cell technology. So, this is an investment by Toyota in tech we'll certainly see in mainstream automotive circles at some point in the future. What experts are divided over is the question of when. Toyota says it expects global fuel cell system sales to increase tenfold in the short term. But then they're virtually at zero right now, so that doesn't mean that much. And anyway, much of that growth will be accounted for by trucks and buses. That's certainly how the government's UK Hydrogen Strategy report, published in summer 2021, sees it. By 2030, it envisages hydrogen to be in use across a range of transport modes, including HGVs, buses and rail, along with early-stage uses in commercial shipping and aviation. Cars aren't even mentioned. Undaunted, Toyota is among a small group of manufacturers still prepared to heavily invest in fuel cell tech, partnering with BMW, whose iHydrogen Next model will appear later this decade. On the other side of the Sea of Japan, rival conglomerate, the Hyundai Motor Group, is doing much the same sort of thing, partnering with the Volkswagen Group and principally the Audi brand. Their short-term target is to cut the cost of a fuel cell powertrain by half and reduce the overall cost of a fuel cell car by 30%. Well, that's already happening. We've already briefed you on just how much the asking price has dropped in this case for a far higher value product. As for production costs, well, when the original Mirai model was launched in 2014, a fuel cell took 15 minutes to manufacture. Now it's just a few seconds. Just as significantly, the filament winding process necessary to make the car's high-pressure hydrogen tanks robust and minimise leaks has been cut by a third. The extra take-up for this much-improved Mark II model will see economies of scale kick in too. It all sounds quite promising. It'll obviously further aid this car's sales prospects that it doesn't have much competition. At the time of this test, the only other fuel cell car on sale in the UK was the Hyundai Nexo, which is a large SUV and which the Korean maker wasn't even quoting a price for at the time of this film. When we last tried that car in 2021, it was costing around £70,000 and offered a 413-mile driving range, 11 miles more than this Toyota. It's most likely, though, that if you were thinking of switching to a Mirai, it'd be as an alternative to a conventional EV, probably something like a Tesla. So, to give you some perspective, at the time of this test, a comparable Tesla Model 3, slightly shorter on the outside and slightly bigger on the inside than a Mirai, costs around £55,000 in long-range form and offers a 374-mile driving range. Toyota, of course, offers a conventional EV too, the BZ4X SUV, which is priced in the £42,000 to £52,000 bracket, and offers a 280-mile driving range. And of course, there are any number of other similarly sized, mid-sized EV models you could consider in the same kind of price bracket. But the whole reason you'd be considering a hydrogen fuel cell car like this, though, is because you don't want an EV. So you'll probably be drawn back to this one. And if so, you'll want to know just how generous Toyota has been when it comes to standard spec. So let's take a look at that now. Base design specification gets you 19-inch silver alloy wheels, bi-LED headlights with automatic high beam, keyless smart entry, power folding mirrors, cruise control and auto headlamps and wipers. Inside, there's an 8-inch multi-information instrument cluster display, a reversing camera and heated front seats with power adjustment for the driver and dual-zone air conditioning with an air purification system. Infotainment's taken care of by a multimedia system with a 12.3-inch Toyota Touch 2 central control screen that gives you Apple CarPlay and Android Auto smartphone mirroring and a 14-speaker JBL premium sound system with a DAB tuner and Bluetooth. Want to go further? Well, if so, the mid-range design Plus Pack model comes with front parking sensors along with reverse tilt, memory function and puddle light features on the door mirrors. Inside, Design Plus Pack Spec gets you synthetic leather seat upholstery, a panoramic view monitor, a heated steering wheel and ambient cabin lighting with 8 colour choices. Blind spot monitoring also makes the kit list. Finally, there's the top Design Premium Pack model we have here, identifiable by these 20-inch black alloy wheels and its Skyview panoramic glass top integrated into the black bitone contrast coloured roof. There are also cornering lights, rear privacy glass and Toyota's Teammate Advanced Park automated parking system, which can slot your Mirai into spaces for you and even remember frequently used ones. Inside, with Design Premium Pack Spec, you get semi-aniline leather seat upholstery, triple zone air conditioning, a colour head-up display, a wireless phone charger, digital rear view mirror, heated and ventilated front and outer rear seats, powered steering wheel adjustment and a rear seat passenger control panel secreted into the armrest. Across the Mirai range, as with all new Toyotas, useful connected services can be accessed via the MyT Toyota smartphone app. For the Mirai, as with a Toyota EV, it allows you to preset the climate system before you reach the car, so the cabin will be perfectly warm or cool at the beginning of your journey, including demisting the heated steering wheel and the seats. And you won't have to expend FCEV system energy on excessive fan use. As it does with other Toyotas, the MyT app can also brief you on speed cameras and real-time traffic information. Plus, it can check points of interest along your route, locate parking spaces and review destinations with Google Street View. Other MyT features include practical and useful information about the brand and an eco-driving app. MyT also logs driving data, so information about mileage, speed and acceleration can be retrieved at a later date. And it can also provide reminders about when the car's service is due. As a Mirai customer, you shouldn't come expecting too many options, which is probably just as well, because you'll almost certainly have to spend quite a lot more on your preferred paint colour. The only standard shade is metallic dark blue. Otherwise, you'll have to find £965 more for one of Toyota's various pearlescent shades, which include the scarlet flare finish we have here. The choices include a new multi-layered option, Force Blue, which produces a contrasting depth of vividness and shadow across the bodywork. On to safety. Now, you might have some concerns here. You don't want to end up at the wheel of an automotive Hindenburg. Hydrogen is, after all, highly flammable, and carrying it around is tricky, which is why it's so complex to transport hydrogen to fueling stations, either by tanker or by pipeline. Hence the reason why the tanks holding the pressurised gas need to be tough, strongly sealed and extremely crash resistant, as indeed they are in this case. The tanks have a resin lining to prevent the permeation of hydrogen and are outside coated with a light and strong reinforced carbon fibre resin. Sensors throughout the car will immediately detect any leak of hydrogen and illuminate a warning light in the driver's instrument display. But in any case, all 3 tanks are located outside the cabin space, so any escaping gas will quickly disperse in the environment. In the unlikely event of a fire or increased temperature inside the tanks, a safety valve will automatically release the gas to avoid rupture. As for crash protection, well, the Mirai is built with a collision safety structure designed to protect vehicle occupants, the fuel cell stack and the hydrogen tanks in the event of an impact. A strong body frame minimises cabin deformation, channeling and absorbing impact forces. To address the features specific to an FCEV, aluminium members are integrated into the fuel cell stack structure, with energy-absorbing parts at the front to mitigate the effects of a front-end impact. Hopefully all of that leaves you feeling a little more confident about this car's safety status, so we can go on now and detail the camera safety kit fitted across the range. There's quite a lot of it. A huge step forward's been taken over what was fitted to the first generation version of this car. All Mark II Mirai models get the Toyota Safety Sense package, which gives you a wide range of standard features. As you'd expect, an autonomous braking system is one of them. The car's PCS, or pre-collision system, able to detect pedestrians in the vehicle's path in day and nighttime driving, and bicycle riders during daylight. The system also provides additional safeguards when making a left or right turn at a road junction, detecting oncoming traffic or pedestrians crossing the road into which the vehicle is turning. Visual and audible alerts are sounded if the driver doesn't react. Automatic braking will be initiated. The PCS system also has an emergency steering assist function. If it determines that a collision is likely and that there's sufficient room in the vehicle's lane to avoid an impact, it will provide extra steering assistance while maintaining vehicle stability and preventing lane departure. It will also help guard against the risk of an impact if the driver puts excessive pressure on the accelerator when driving at low speeds. The system then automatically reducing engine output or lightly applying the brakes to suppress the acceleration. Next up with the Safety Sense package is Toyota's IACC, or Intelligent Adaptive Cruise Control System, which has an all-speed tracking function and will automatically calculate if speed needs to be reduced when driving through a bend. Speed suppression will operate from the moment the steering wheel begins to turn, continuing until the angle returns to the straight ahead. The IACC setup works in conjunction with two other Safety Sense features, LDA, or Lane Departure Alert, and LTA, or Lane Trace Assist, both there to help keep your Mirai centred in its traffic lane. If the car deviates from its lane without the turn indicators being used, the LDA and LTA system will sound a warning, display an alert, and trigger steering wheel vibration. Steering assistance will then be applied if required to help return the vehicle to its correct path. The LTA setup is also able to detect if the driver may have suffered an emergency with a driver emergency stop assist feature that determines if there is continuous non-operation of driving functions. For example, if the driver's hands are not on the wheel after a medical emergency. It will issue visual and audible warnings then. If there is no response from the driver, it will gently bring the car to a halt and activate the hazard warning lights and horn to alert other road users. Other welcome Safety Sense features include RSA, or Road Sign Assist, which keeps the driver alert to principal road sign commands and warnings, presenting them as images on the multi-information instrument screen, and, on this design premium pack model, the head-up display. The system can also work with the IACC setup to automatically keep the car within the speed limits enforced in the course of a journey. So, if you press the right buttons to activate this feature, you should never get caught by a speeding camera ever again. In theory, anyway. As mentioned earlier, if you avoid entry-level trim with your Mirai, and you also get a blind spot monitor, which will alert you if you're just about to pull out dangerously in front of another vehicle. The final standard Safety Sense features we need to mention depend on trim in terms of sophistication. We'll start with the LED headlights. Now, we mentioned earlier that they come with automatic high beam, and on this design premium pack model, they're also fitted with an adaptive high beam system that turns the beam as you turn the wheel. As for parking stuff, well, the base design spec model comes with rear cross traffic alert, which will search for oncoming traffic when you're reversing out of a space. If necessary, auto braking the car to avoid a collision. Mid and top spec Mirais upgrade this system to Toyota's useful PKSB, or Parking Support Brake System, which uses an intelligence clearance sonar to tell if you're about to move forward into an object at low speed, say a low wall, or worse, a wandering child or pet. If the sonar determines that the risk of collision is extremely high, then the brakes are automatically applied to help avoid the collision or reduce the impact. So, there are the main camera safety elements, and you get all the expected passive safety features too, of course. 7 airbags and an e-call system that'll automatically alert the emergency services with your exact GPS location should any of the bags ever inflate in an accident. You can also tick off ISOFIX child seat anchors, a tyre pressure warning system and an emergency brake light signal that activates in panic stops. Plus, there's hill start assist control and driver attention alert, which constantly monitors your driving reactions for signs of drowsiness. In addition, there are all the usual features for braking, traction and stability control interlinked by Toyota's Vehicle Dynamics Integrated Management System. It's all very reassuring. If you've already viewed our driving experience section, you'll already know about the fairly substantial elephant in the room here. The fact that if you choose to buy or more likely lease this car, there will be hardly any British refuelling stations for you to fill it up at once the claimed 402-mile driving range is used. As we said earlier in this film, at the time of this test in spring 2022, there were just 12 of these on the UK mainland. To be specific, 5 around London, 2 around Swindon and 1 near Gatwick. North of Luton, there are just 3 locations to replenish this Toyota with hydrogen in Birmingham, Sheffield and Aberdeen, which has a couple of stations. Another lies on Orkney, of all places, which won't be much help unless you're planning to emigrate there as a monk with your Mirai. We can't encourage you towards Mirai purchase with promises of a great filling station infrastructure expansion in the coming years either. At the time of this test, just 4 more UK hydrogen car filling stations were being planned in Glasgow, Middlesbrough, Derby and St Helens. We've heard of plans to increase the number of available stations to 65 by the year 2025. Yeah, right. At present, the government can't even keep to its commitments for the EV charging network, let alone start worrying about one for hydrogen. On top of all that, there's the danger of arriving at one of these hydrogen refuelling stations to find the pump broken or out of gas. Or maybe because there are so few pumps available, there'll be a queue for it, which, if 2 or 3 FC EVs were in front of you, would require a 10 to 15 minute wait. In this test, we used a website, ukh2mobility.co.uk, to find stations and a useful app called h2.live to get live updates on when they were open or closed. Even with all of that forward planning, it's easy to get into a panic situation if you finally arrive at a long-promised station with just 30 or so miles of range and find yourself faced with an availability problem. So we'd suggest you refuel the car when the range gets down to around 100 miles or so, which of course shortens the Mirai's operating distance even further. Combine that with an actual real-world range that's typically more like 300 to 350 miles, and you end up close to the circa 250-mile energy replenishment cycle of a typical EV. If all goes well, you find a refuelling station and you're able to replenish the 3 tanks, all done from one nozzle. Refuelling takes about 5 minutes and costs £12 to £15 for a kilo of hydrogen, so a total cost of around £80 for full replenishment. About the same, in other words, as an equivalent combustion-powered model. Unlike with petrol or diesel refuelling though, you can't see for yourself whether the pump has fully filled the tank because of course hydrogen comes in gaseous form. More need for trust in the currently rather shaky UK refuelling infrastructure. It's much better on the continent in terms of quality and number of stations, so it'll be much easier to take your Mirai on a European trip than it will be to drive it for longer distances here. Further, more positive news comes with Toyota's expectation that the cost of hydrogen will drop substantially by the end of the decade as bus and truck fleets take it up and more hydrogen is produced renewably. Plus, in the future, this gas will start to qualify for credits under the government's Renewable Transport Fuels Obligation policy. As a result of all this, Toyota reckons that by 2030, hydrogen could be selling at the pumps for as little as £5 per kilogram, which would slash the cost of refuelling this car to under £30. Still with us in analysing the running cost implications of owning this car? If so, congratulations, you're a true blue early adopter. And if there were more people like you prepared to make hydrogen fuel cell technology work, then our environment would be far better served. We freely admit that this remains a controversial viewpoint. As with electricity for EVs, hydrogen is most commonly produced by smoky power stations. That's called brown hydrogen. Slightly better are the grey and blue brands of hydrogen that are produced by various forms of steam methane reformation using natural gas. Only though if you were to power your Mirai exclusively by so-called green hydrogen made by electrolysis of water powered by renewable energy, could you claim it to be really zero in emissions. And running the car exclusively on that would be more challenging still. So, how does it run on hydrogen? We've left the science bit until now because if you're still with us at this point, it's likely that you're really interested, as we are, in how all of this actually works. In an EV, the energy to drive the car is stored in its battery and accessed via a chemical reaction. In an FCEV or fuel cell electric vehicle, the energy to drive the car comes from hydrogen cells stored in hydrogen gas, located in tanks made of carbon fibre and aluminium and located beneath the floor plan. As we explained in our driving section, there are 3 of these tanks in this second generation Mirai model, a longitudinal one positioned between the front seats and 2 transverse ones under the rear bench and cargo area floor. The gas is stored at 700 bar, that's 10,000 psi, and together these tanks improve the car's fuel capacity to 5.6 kilograms, which is 1 kilogram more than the original model could offer. Still with us? Pay attention at the back. Here's the really clever bit. The gas from those tanks is fed by pumps into the car's fuel cell stack, 24 litres in size in the case of this Mirai, and so now small enough to be located beneath the bonnet. Electricity is generated by the fuel cell as hydrogen atoms are drawn through its anode, which splits them into electrons and protons. The separated electrons are then forced through an external circuit, which forms the electrical current which mainly powers the car. The electrons then finish their journey at the fuel cell's cathode, where they're combined with the protons and with oxygen, generating the waste products of heat and water. Which is why when you stop this Mirai, you get a short-lived vapour cloud swirling away at the back of the car. If you don't want a puddle beneath the car on your driveway or the danger of your neighbours thinking you've taken up vaping, you can manually activate water discharge before you stop using a dash-mounted H2O switch to the right of the steering wheel. You probably haven't noticed because this is essentially an EV, but we haven't yet given you an official WLTP combined cycle fuel figure. There actually is one, but we haven't actually bothered quoting it because it'll probably mean as little to you as it does to us. This car is rated at between 317.3 and 357.5 mpg and officially offers 0 grams per kilometre of CO2. Earlier we questioned this car's real-world right to claim zero emissions status, just as we do when testing EVs. Toyota not only disagrees on that, but goes further, claiming so-called minus emissions status for this Mirai because its air purification system removes 90 to 100% of noxious particles from the oxygen before it reaches the fuel cell. That means getting rid of pollutants, oxides of nitrogen and harmful particulates. So this car actually cleans the air you drive it through, which is deeply impressive. That's your argument trump card against questioning EV fanatics. Right, enough on efficiency theory. What about in practice? Well, as in an EV, there are lots of tools to help you eke out that all-important driving range, aided by this Mark II model's more aerodynamic design with its flush side bodywork surfaces and aero-stabilising fins on the leading edge of the front side windows. You'll obviously need, wherever possible, to keep the car in its most frugal eco driving mode, of course, and get into the habit of selecting the B rather than the D drive gear ratio when you start off for maximisation of brake energy regenerative harvesting, something you can further improve by activating a selectable brake driving mode. What else? Well, there's a Charge Eco Power meter that can display both on the instrument screen and on the head-up display, and you can select an energy monitor to display either on the instrument display or at the side of the central screen, which can show you at any given time the power flow between fuel cell, battery and wheels. There's also an eco section of that instrument screen that grades you on each trip for start, cruise and stop efficiency, and there's no getting away from that because your scores for each journey are always summarised on the instrument screen at the end of each trip as you power off. What else? Well, just like an EV, you'll qualify for 1% benefit in kind taxation. You'll have no VED car tax payments to make in the first 3 years of ownership, and free access to city congestion zones, at least until 2025 anyway. Thatcham doesn't much like the thought of a Mirai though. The grouping is up at 34E. Maintenance shouldn't cost any more than it would on a conventional EV. Scheduled garage visits are every year or every 10,000 miles, whichever comes sooner. And finally, there's the issue of depreciation, a chronic problem with the first generation Mirai, but that had a lot to do with the fact that Toyota were trying to sell a Prius-style family hatch for £66,000. This Mark II model's more opulent feel and lower price should go a long way in improving this model's future residual showing, but ultimately that'll depend on market take-up. The CAP HPI Gold Book quotes a retained value figure of 47% after 3 years and 36,000 miles. Finally, if you're worried about the complexity of this car's fuel cell drivetrain, we'll tell you Toyota isn't. The Mirai is covered by a 5-year, 100,000 mile warranty. And to finish with, if you've concerns about the reliability and longevity of fuel cell tech, then you shouldn't have. No major issues were reported in this regard in the first generation Mirai model's 7-year production run. And since fuel cells don't degrade like lithium-ion batteries do in EV models, they tend to last the car's lifetime and beyond. Think in the region of 150,000 miles. They can also be much more easily recycled, making them a greener option. This feels like a significant moment in fuel cell development, the most credible hydrogen-powered model yet made. And like Toyota, we're disappointed that so little progress has been made on improving the hydrogen filling station infrastructure since the original Mirai model was launched. But that isn't going to happen until there are more FCEV cars on the road. And that isn't going to happen until car manufacturers make fuel cell models people want and can realistically afford to buy or lease. Well, this is the first of those. We applaud Toyota for developing this car for production when so many rivals have been half-hearted about FCEV technology or haven't bothered with it at all. And we're even more impressed that the brand has improved the Mirai so much and yet, having done so, has pitched it at a much reduced price that can't be profitable. It's how a responsible industry leader should act in establishing new technology and replicates what Toyota did a quarter of a century ago in creating the hybrid engine tech we now all take for granted. Yet we can't ignore the packaging issues here. Rear seat space is ridiculously compromised for a car this large, and boot capacity isn't much better. It's difficult to see how these issues could be overcome with current FCEV technology, and even harder to see how they would work with a smaller car than this. Other than that, though, there's very little to criticise about this actual product, providing you appreciate this Mirai's heavy-set, laid-back luxury vibe. We like it very much. But, like you, probably, we couldn't justify owning one. Not at the moment, anyway. After all, unless you happen to live near a refuelling point and have another somewhere near your regular journey destinations, it's difficult to see how a hydrogen fuel cell car can make any sense to an ordinary family or business customer, even one determined to early adopt themselves to this far more sustainable brand of automotive propulsion. One day, hopefully, that will change, but in the meantime, Toyota is getting on with perfecting this model and has done a thorough job here. Even if you happen to actually own a hydrogen filling station, you might have had trouble justifying the original Mirai with its awkward looks and restricted driving range. Well, there are no issues of that kind with this second-generation design. Toyota has again set the standard here. Other brands should watch and learn.